You might think pirates spent most of their time swinging from rigging, shouting "air," and digging up treasure, but here's something history books don't tell you. Their biggest enemy at sea wasn't the Royal Navy or rival buccaneers. It was something way more boring and slippery: clean drinking water. Yes, in the middle of the vast, salty ocean, surrounded by nothing but seawater, these swashbucklers needed to find a way to drink without the whole crew turning into salty prunes, or worse, getting sick and mutinying. Let me tell you something wild about pirate water troubles. It was basically a nightmare of salty thirst, bad smells, and desperate experiments, and trust me, the solutions they came up with. Clever and occasionally kind of gross in the best way possible. Imagine this. You're stuck on a ship with 50 thirsty pirates, each needing about 1 gallon of fresh water every day just to stay alive. That's 50 gallons daily. And these weren't tiny cups. Think big gulps after a hot day chasing prey or escaping cannon fire. Problem was, the ocean has about 3.5% salt content. That's almost like trying to drink a soup made of salt crystals and fish leftovers. Not exactly the refreshing taste you want after a long sword fight. Drinking seawater outright. Bad idea. Really bad idea. It causes dehydration, kidney failure, and an expedited ticket to Davy Jones' locker. So pirates had to get creative and fast. Their first attempts at solving this. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Pirates tried everything from just collecting rainwater, which sounds ideal, but in the Caribbean's scorching sun, 24 to 48 hours was about the best you could manage before it went rancid. On one ship, the Sea Serpent, captained by the notoriously impatient Black Sam Bellamy, the crew tried collecting rain in barrels left open on deck. But with ship movements and bird droppings, they ended up with more bird poop water than fresh drops. Let's just say it wasn't pretty. Drinking that stuff was like gulping a mystery stew of sea spray and seabird diseases. Not exactly the way to boost morale. Meanwhile, on board the whimsical Witch, a pirate crew tried to scoop up moisture from the morning dew using canvas sheets stretched over the deck. 3 days later, they had just enough to wet their beards, and the water smelled suspiciously like seaweed fart. Not much help when you're parched and about to keel over. Another brilliant but disastrous idea was to try and distill seawater by boiling it and capturing the steam. Sounds like science class, right? But it was the 17th century, and pirate ships weren't exactly floating labs. They rigged up crude stills using pots, some copper pipes scrounged from ship fixtures, and barrels to collect the condensation. Problem 1. Fires on wooden ships rarely end well, and keeping the fire under control while the sea pitched was like trying to walk a plank blindfolded. Problem 2. Their fuel supplies, usually wood or coal, were limited, so running these contraptions was hardly sustainable on long voyages. On Captain Anne Bonny's ship in 1720, the still exploded after a rogue wave, and suddenly her crew had to evacuate the hold because of steamed up barrels and a very angry cook who lost his knives to water damage. It's safe to say that distillation wasn't exactly the miracle fix they hoped for. One of the more amusing failures came from the crew of the Golden Galleon in 1698, where desperate pirates tried filtering seawater through layers of sand, charcoal, and cloth. The theory was pure brilliance: filter out the salt and get fresh water. Except their version of charcoal was bits of burnt wood they found in the galley oven, and the cloth was an old shirt with more holes than fabric. The water tasted like a swamp caught in a sock, and after one ill-fated sip, half the crew spent the next 24 hours hugging the ship's bucket in misery. That's about as far from a potable water source as you can get. Alright, here's where it gets interesting, because pirates figured out something clever. While these early experiments were messy, disastrous adventures, somewhere along the line, they stumbled on a surprisingly effective method that didn't require fancy distillation gear or questionable filtration systems. It was so simple, so ingenious, that it became the backbone of their survival strategy. Turns out, pirates accidentally discovered the art of rainwater catchment combined with barrel rotation and fresh catching techniques that increased water storage life from a couple days to a whole week or more. Not exactly modern purification, but 90% better than guzzling mildew water. Think of it like their version of a water treatment plant, built from nothing but wood, tar, and a bit of pirate know-how. Here's the real genius. Pirates learned that sealing water barrels properly and rotating them on deck to catch rain, while preventing salt spray contamination was key. They used pitch, a tar-like substance derived from pine trees, to line the insides of their wooden barrels, making them watertight and less prone to giving the water a funky, woody flavor. This kept the barrels from soaking up salt water and bacteria from the ship's wet holds. But perhaps most crucial was their routine of refreshing the water barrels after every rainfall, washing out leftovers, and sitting the barrels on their sides to minimize evaporation and prevent salt spray from touching the barrel openings. Captain Henry Morgan's crew reportedly improved their water quality dramatically between his raids in the 1670s and 1680s, thanks to these techniques, allowing them to stay at sea longer and with fewer scurvy cases. Not bad for a bunch of drunken thieves with a taste for rum. Speaking of rum, because nothing says hydration like alcohol, pirates also used that infamous pirate staple to mask the taste of less than perfect water: drinking straight seawater. No, drinking seawater diluted with a touch of rum. A questionable life choice, but at least it tasted better, and the alcohol helped kill some bacteria. It was a bit like their version of a water sanitizer, except with more hangovers and less medical approval. However, the overindulgence had its own problems. Pirates notorious for being rowdy and ill-tempered also had plenty of run-ins when dehydration and drunkenness collided, producing notorious shipboard brawls that, frankly, did more damage than cannonballs. One amazing anecdote involves the infamous pirate calico Jack Rackham, who reportedly used empty barrels filled with freshly melted ice from captured shipments of ice blocks brought from Europe. He and his crew would melt those ice chunks slowly overnight and drink the fresh water from the barrels the next day. Now transporting ice in the Caribbean 1718 style. For pirates used to sweltering heat and stink, this was basically a floating refrigerator miracle and a major morale boost. The downside: the ice was sometimes stored with salted meat, and the resulting water tasted suspiciously like tomato ketchup meets fish market. But hey, beggars can't be choosers. Now, while these methods were effective to a degree, pirates still battled diseases like scurvy, which you might think is about lack of water, but is really about lack of vitamin C. They thought the problem was mostly about conquering germs and salt, but what they really needed was fresh fruit. Unfortunately, fruits like lemons and limes didn't last weeks on open decks, so they developed a strange combo strategy by carrying lime juice in barrels mixed with fresh water. Believe it or not, lime juice was so critical the British Navy got nicknamed Limeys, because they insisted sailors, pirates included, carried citrus. The acidic juice helped keep water fresher longer and gave pirates superhero immunity to scurvy for short periods. It was like their vitamin-enriched secret weapon, hidden in barrels painted black. All of this was much harder than it sounds, of course. Ships weren't exactly hygiene heaven. They were cramped, smelly, and crawling with rats the size of small dogs. Because nothing says pirate chic like overcrowded rat infestations stealing your food and peeing in your water. In between wiping salt spray off the barrels, pirates had to keep rats from chewing holes in their precious water supplies or knocking barrels overboard. Talk about ruining your fearsome reputation while desperately guarding your daily gallon of non-poop water. And speaking of poop, here's a fun little gross-out fact. Some pirate crews got so desperate that they tried collecting gray water from leaks and dripping sails. It was essentially distilled seawater dripping from canvas, minus the big salt crystals but loaded with who knows what else. One pirate diary from the 1690s recorded that this method provided roughly 2 gallons per day for a crew of 30, which cut dehydration rates, but also caused a lot of mysterious rashes and unfortunate smells described as the scent of sea and regret. Pirates called it Captain Sweat because drinking it was as unpleasant as the name suggests. This is not what you picture when someone says pirate life, but I guess even pirates had unexpected human moments of resourcefulness mixed with repulsion. So here they were, balancing on the knife edge of thirst and survival, patching barrels, catching rain, boiling seawater when they could, mixing in rum and lime juice, and occasionally sipping from dripping canvas with a prayer. The cleverness wasn't just in the tech but in routine discipline, which, let's be honest, pirates weren't famous for, and an intuitive understanding of their environment. 30-day voyages without a fresh water stop became possible, and this meant bigger raids, longer escapes, and more stories for their boastful tavern nights. But despite all this ingenuity, some captains took it to the next level, experimenting with early forms of desalination and filtration that, while primitive, were ahead of their time. We'll get into that next, along with some of the most bizarre pirate water mishaps you've never heard of. Because if you think keeping a ship afloat is tough, try keeping a crew hydrated when all you've got is ocean water, a few barrels, and a cursed parrot demanding crackers. Stay tuned. There's a wild story coming up about a pirate who tried distilling seawater with none other than his brand new spyglass and nearly blew his ship to kingdom come. You're not gonna want to miss how that mess ended. Alright mate, so by now you're probably thinking pirates either drowned in their own bad ideas or stumbled upon the holy grail of fresh water by pure dumb luck. Spoiler alert, it was somewhere in between, with plenty of chaos, sweat, and unfortunate smells along the way. But here's where it gets even crazier. Some pirate captains weren't just lazy rum guzzlers. They were accidental inventors tinkering with early desalination methods long before science caught up. You see, around the late 17th and early 18th centuries, pirates started experimenting with something that, for all intents and purposes, was the great-great-grandparent of modern water filters and desalination plants. Yeah, they were on to something, even if their labs were basically the bottom of the galley and their scientific instruments were just old bits scavenged from shipwrecks and captured merchant vessels. Let's zoom in on a particularly infamous case. Captain Christopher Condent, the English pirate who terrorized the Indian Ocean in the 1710s. Now, Condent wasn't just busy looting. He got curious about how to keep his crew hydrated for longer stretches at sea. So he cobbled together a rudimentary condenser using iron pots, copper tubes, and some stolen glass, which, by the way, was almost revolutionary for a pirate. His method involved boiling seawater to create steam, and then cooling that steam to condense it back into fresh water, a process we know today as distillation. But here's the catch. The constant pitch and tar fumes mixed in during the process often gave the fresh water a peculiar aftertaste, like a barbecue gone wrong. Not exactly bottled mountain spring, but it got the job done. The crew called it tar tea, and while it wasn't winning any popularity contests, it was better than salty death. Yet, just like with Captain Anne Bonny still earlier, maintaining the fire was dangerous. One wrong wave or gust of wind and the whole thing could go up in smoke, literally. Loud explosions, wet runaway barrels, and frantic scrambles pretty much guaranteed every distillation session was more action-packed than a cannon battle. While distillation was high-tech for its time, it wasn't exactly practical for every pirate crew, especially those skimping on fuel or lacking a patient engineer to babysit the contraption. Enter the low-tech genius of the cooler box system, a device pirates adapted from an old Roman water cooling method. This involved hanging porous clay pots filled with seawater in shaded areas of the ship, so evaporation and condensation could naturally separate salt from water, giving small quantities of drinkable water every day. It's basically what some desert nomads used, centuries before pirates thought about it. Try that on a rocking ship deck, though, and you've got a recipe for broken pots, soaked sails, and even thirstier pirates cursing the weather gods. But the most impressive survival trick didn't even require any fancy gadgetry. It was about the barrels themselves. You see, pirates were masters of barrel engineering, and not just for storing rum and gunpowder. The barrels they used to hold water, typically 63 gallons each, were specially crafted and treated with natural resins and pine pitch to make them airtight and prevent rot and contamination. Now, you might not think sealing a barrel is that big a deal, but keep in mind that storing water in wooden containers is a battle against bacteria, leakage, and barrel-sucking worms. These barrels had to withstand swinging ship decks, salt spray, and sometimes, in true pirate style, drunken misadventure when a wild night of rum turned into an accidental cannonball party. Hello smashed barrels and lost hydration. Pirates learned through trial and error that rotating barrels on their sides helped reduce contact with salty deck moisture and allowed rainwater to refresh the supply directly through specially designed bung holes, which they cleverly plugged with rolled pieces of cloth and beeswax to keep out salt spray and critters. Think of it like a medieval self-cleaning cooler. The result? Water that stayed drinkable for up to 7 days instead of turning into a swampy cocktail of wood rot and sea grime in 2. Speaking of critters, rats on pirate ships were more than a nuisance. They were amphibious little devils with a taste for everything, including water barrels. Pirates had to get creative guarding their precious liquid gold. Sometimes they placed barrels on raised wooden platforms, or even surrounded them with sharp iron spikes to keep the rat armies at bay. Because nothing says intimidating pirate crew like a circle of rusty spikes around your drinking supply. Right. Unfortunately, these defenses weren't always effective. There are recorded instances in the late 1600s Caribbean where pirates woke up to find their water barrels gnawed open, leaving them with nothing but a salty puddle and the tail of some very satisfied rats swimming happily away. Talk about ruining your fearsome reputation when your most formidable foe is a pack of sewer rats with a sweet tooth for fresh water. Now, as if salt and vermin weren't enough, pirates had to battle the ever-present problem of scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency that could kill a whole crew faster than a rival gang of buccaneers. Here's a fun fact. Pirates weren't completely clueless. They knew citrus was their best defense. But fresh lemons, limes, and oranges didn't exactly survive banana boat-style journeys across the ocean, especially when stowed below deck without refrigeration. So the solution: carry concentrated lime juice stored in barrels mixed with water, which was basically pirate vitamin C shots in a bottle. The acidity not only staved off scurvy, but also helped keep the water fresher longer, a 2-for-1 miracle in their eyes. This is actually why British sailors earned the nickname limeys, because the Royal Navy and pirates by proxy adopted this trick in the late 1700s. Without it, long voyages would have been death sentences, not just endurance tests. But what about on the odd days when even lime juice was unavailable? Pirates had to resort to some seriously weird makeshift hydration techniques. During long Caribbean droughts, crews would collect moisture from the ship's wooden planks and sails. Think medieval-level dew collection techniques, but with zero hygiene. This method, known as Captain Sweat, involved literally wringing out damp sails or collecting condensation from cool nighttime wood surfaces into buckets. Spoiler alert, it tasted worse than it sounds. Think salty, musty, and a hint of who knows what, topped off with the unmistakable waft of forgotten fish guts. One ship's log from 1692 complains of crew members passing around the Captain's Sweat ration with faces contorted into expressions better suited for walking the plank. But hey, in a pinch, a little gross out beats giant unquenchable thirst, and pirates were expert survivors when it came to making do. Meanwhile, there was a kind of unofficial hierarchy around water rationing aboard pirate vessels. The captain and officers usually got the first and best servings of fresh water, probably because a dehydrated captain is a dead captain, and dead captains aren't great for business. The lower ranks, they were lucky to get leftover barrel water that had been sitting around a bit too long and probably hosted a colony of bacteria with more members than the crew. Some pirates scoffed at this unequal distribution. Mutinies sometimes sparked over water, cheese, or rum shortages. The story goes that on the notorious ship Revenge in 1723, a sailor tried to steal from the captain's water barrel and was promptly marooned on a nearby island. Talk about hydration justice. Now, while we mostly focus on drinking water, pirates also faced the challenge of cooking and cleaning with salt water. Salt corrodes cookware faster than you can say, swab the decks, and mixing seawater with cooking ingredients meant fish stews and hardtack that tasted perpetually marine. Some captains insisted on carrying fresh water specifically for cooking, rationing it carefully, while others trusted in their ability to season meals with rum and make do. One famous pirate, Bartholomew Roberts, allegedly kept a small freshwater tank below deck dedicated solely to boiling food, arguing it kept his crew healthier and less grumpy. And let's face it, a grouchy pirate is a danger to everyone on board. But even with all these clever hacks, pirates never had the luxury of pure, endless fresh water like we expect today. So it's amazing they survived as long as they did, often spending months at sea and navigating tricky weather, hostile navies, and trenchcoat-wearing pirates, all while juggling the constant threat of dehydration. Their ingenuity wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving in a place designed to kill you slowly with thirst, heat, and salt. The truth is, pirates were the original marine hydrologists who, through trial, error, and yes, plenty of foul-smelling disasters, invented the foundations of seawater desalination centuries before science made it trendy. So next time you picture a pirate sunbathing on a treasure chest, remember the real treasure they sought was something much more mundane, but much harder to come by on a rolling ship. Clean, drinkable water. Without it, there'd be no air. Just a whole lot of ag. My throat feels like it's been salted and peppered. Cheers to the clever, resourceful, and slightly stinky pirates who sailed the seas with nothing but barrels, tar, and sheer stubbornness to keep their thirst at bay. Alright, so you're hanging tight with me after all those barrel mishaps, rat attacks, and tar-flavored, distilled, water disasters. Good. Because now we dive into the part where pirates nearly became the accidental pioneers of desalination before the science world even knew what to call it. Picture this. Early 1700s, Captain Christopher Condent cruising the Indian Ocean with a crew of about 60 thirsty souls, thinking, there's got to be a better way than these swampy barrels and Captain Sweat rations. So what did his savvy pirate brain cook up? A homemade still. That's right. Think of it as Pirate Rube Goldberg meets junior chemist. Using rusty iron pots for boiling, some surprisingly decent copper tubing scavenged from captured merchant ships, and glass stolen from God knows where, Condent rigged a contraption that boiled seawater to produce steam, then chilled that steam back into drinkable water. Science from the galley floor. But don't imagine some peaceful, bubbling scientific paradise, the naval equivalent of a chemistry set. Nope. This still was a potential floating bomb. One rogue wave could douse the fire, and cold water in copper tubes could shatter glass, causing shouts, curses, and a whole lot of scrambling. There's an incident where Condent still went kaboom mid-voyage, sending steamed-up barrels and soaked knives flying all over the place, not exactly helping the morale. Still, despite tasting like a tar pit and the occasional splash of smelly seawater, this tar tea was a game changer. Because at 70% efficiency, it meant the crew could literally drink the ocean without dying of salt poisoning. Pretty sweet for a bunch of pirates, right? Now, for those crews without a mad scientist captain or the luxury of copper pipes and glass, instead of fancy boiling rigs, others relied on a much cooler idea inspired by ancient Romans, the cooler box system. Imagine a ship full of clay pots dangling in the shade, slowly doing their thing by evaporating salt-laden seawater and collecting the fresh condensation. It's basically the pirate version of your hipster friend's mason jar water filter, minus Instagram likes. The science here. As seawater seeps through the porous clay, evaporation robs it of salt, leaving behind drinkable water inside the pot. Neat, right? But try balancing fragile clay pots on a pitching, rolling wooden ship in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and that simple piece of ancient tech suddenly becomes a pirate's worst nightmare. A chorus of crashing pottery and cursing sailors. Not to mention, the amount each pot produced was barely enough to wet the beards of a handful of pirates, far from the 50 gallons daily a ship might need. So while it was clever, it was more like a fancy novelty than a survival staple. Speaking of staples, let's talk barrels again, but not just any barrels. Pirates were master barrel craftsmen, and the secret sauce to keeping water drinkable for days without turning into a science experiment gone rancid was less about fancy tech and more about old-school know-how and elbow grease. These weren't your run-of-the-mill seashells for booze or gunpowder. These were 63-gallon wooden barrels sealed with layers of pitch, a sticky, piney tar-like goo that kept salt spray, bacteria, and wiggling worms from sneaking in. The barrels were rotated regularly, lying on their sides, perched on wooden racks above deck away from salty puddles, and those nosy rats who, by the way, had been known to chow through barrel wood like it was a buffet. Pirates learned that keeping the barrels tilted allowed any salty spray that did spritz nearby to drain away before seeping in. Plus, they'd swap out the water after rainstorms, scrubbing barrels when they could, and using plugs made from rolled cloth and beeswax to stop sneaky salt water from creeping in. So imagine a floating, medieval water treatment plant powered by nothing but pitch, hard knocks, and sweat. Definitely not fancy, but about 90% more effective than just leaving barrels open on deck. Captain Henry Morgan's crew in the 17th century swear by this method, boasting way fewer cases of dehydration and scurvy on their lengthy raids. Turns out, good barrel management was their secret weapon alongside swords and rum. Now, if you thought rats were just cute pests, think again. These little furry fiends were the cruelest opponents in the water game. Rats had no shame, gnawing barrels, stealing food, chewing ropes, and generally causing havoc below decks. Pirates tried everything to keep them at bay, from iron spikes driven around water barrels to placing barrels on raised platforms. Basically a medieval, no rats allowed sign. Not always successful, mind you. One notorious tale from a Caribbean pirate ship in one hot summer of the 1600s tells of a morning when the crew woke up to find their prized drinking water reduced to a salty puddle, thanks to a rat mafia making off with their liquid gold. Not exactly fearsome pirate crew material when your worst enemy is the ship's rodent population. Talk about ruining your reputation. Getting outsmarted by rats has to sting more than a cannonball, but at least it kept the pirate engineers on their toes, constantly patching barrels and innovating. And while barrels and rats fought their endless war, pirates had a far darker battle looming atop their thirst, that scurvy bastard that caused whole crews to keel over faster than you can say, walk the plank. Scurvy wasn't about water, surprisingly. It was about the lack of vitamin C, which pirates had so little of it that entire crews looked like zombie rejects with bleeding gums and falling teeth. But pirates learned early on that carrying fresh fruit was a logistical nightmare. Lemons and limes rotted quicker than the chances of escaping a naval ambush. So what did they do? Carry lime juice in barrels, mixed with their fresh water supplies, basically pirate multivitamins in a bottle. This sour juice wasn't just a refreshing flavor bomb. It also helped preserve the water longer, as the acidity kept bacteria at bay. Hence, the nickname limeys given to British sailors who adopted lime juice as a staple in the late 1700s. Without it, you'd be looking at a pirate ship full of gumless zombies making poor decisions about whose skull to bash in next. Captain Bartholomew Roberts, for example, was known to guard his lime juice barrels like treasure, understanding that happy, hydrated pirates were less likely to mutiny mid-ocean. Without lime juice, pirates scrambled and drank whatever they could scrounge, which sometimes meant resorting to questionable sources. Enter Captain Sweat. No, that's not a euphemism for your ship's laziest cook. It was a real thing. Pirates would wring out moisture from damp sails, squeeze condensation from wet wood in the cool night air, or collect the drips from leaking canvas. Science tells us this was basically distilled seawater minus the fancy equipment. But here's the catch. This bathtub water tasted like salty, musty fish guts marinated in old socks left out in the sun. You can probably guess how that ended. Crew members grimacing enough to break their own mugs, and at least a handful regretting every decision that led to that desperate drink. How bad was it? One ship's log from the late 1600s noted that passing around Captain Sweat was akin to passing the plague, except with more foul language and fewer survivors. But hey, when you're stranded on a rolling prison without fresh water, wretched water is better than no water. Pirates had to survive, one grim swig at a time. Then there was the delicate dance of water rationing and hierarchy aboard these floating hellholes. Captains and first mates always snagged the best, freshest water. Why? Because a dehydrated captain means no captain and, well, no one running the ship, or worse, mutiny breaks out. The rest of the crew often had to make do with what was left. Stale, meandering barrel water that tasted like a biohazard cocktail. This led to legendary shipboard arguments, water theft, and even maroonings. One famous episode aboard the Revenge in the early 1720s involves a sailor trying to filch water from the captain's private stash, only to be caught and left on a desert island with a single barrel of swamp water, kind of like pirate water justice, but with more sunburn and scorpion stings. The fear of losing precious water was so real that pirates developed a kind of water mafia, a code to protect liquid gold at all costs. That water'd save your life or send you walking the plank, and there was no middle ground. Water wasn't just for quenching thirst either. Pirates had to cook and clean with it, which added another layer of complexity. Salt water was a nightmare for pots and pans, corroding metals faster than a drunken brawl in a tavern. Pirates tried to ration fresh water strictly for cooking, boiled hardtack and salted meat, but sometimes mixed seawater slipped in, turning meals into salt cod-flavored disasters. A clever pirate captain named Bartholomew Roberts reportedly kept a separate freshwater tank just for cooking and cleaning, arguing that a fed and clean crew fought better. And honestly, a grumpy pirate with bad teeth isn't something you want mutinying at 2 a.m. So the water management extended beyond just drinking. It was about keeping the whole ship's ecosystem running. Consider it an early understanding of hygiene at sea, long before anyone invented soap or hand sanitizer. Despite all their trials, gruesome mishaps, and sometimes ridiculous solutions, pirates' real achievement was surviving months at sea with limited resources. They turned desperate experiments into semi-reliable systems that let them extend voyages, inflict more raids, and loosen Royal Navy's tight grip. Their methods weren't clean by any modern standard, but they were effective, using barrels sealed tight with pitch, rainwater catchment, distillation experiments, lime juice fortification, and even rat-proof defenses. Pirates didn't just fight for treasure. They fought for every precious drop of drinkable water, making them, arguably, the original marine hydrologists who stumbled on the foundations of modern desalination centuries before it was trendy or profitable. So next time you picture a pirate lounging on golden doubloons, grinning with a parrot on his shoulder, remember the real treasure was the stale, sometimes wretched water they fought tooth and nail to keep fresh enough to survive. Without those clever hacks, there'd be no air. Just a lot of ag. My mouth tastes like a salted fish left out too long. Here's to the pirate crews who faced down salt, rats, scurvy, and broken barrels to quench their thirst and keep the legend alive. Slightly stinky, wildly inventive, and stubborn to the last drop. Drink up, matey, and may your future hydration always be less Captain Sweat and more fresh rain from the clouds above.